What is up, everybody? I'm NoLucksGiven here with your afternoon snap, and today I wanted to break down why I chose this deck for the Golden Gauntlet tournament. And this might seem like a pretty straightforward answer. Hey, NoLux, why did you choose the deck that you've won a tournament with and is kind of agreed to be the best deck in the game right now? Well, yeah, okay. This is not a secret deck. This is a pretty straightforward deck choice, right? But I do want to get into some of the individual card decisions that I did ultimately decide on and the philosophy that I have going into this event, which is a little bit different of a format, and the format does kind of make me consider which deck I'm going to choose. And that's because this is an open deck list format. At the beginning of each round, you will get to see which 12 cards your opponent is playing with, and they will get to see which 12 cards you are playing with. So that, I think, does add some interesting dynamics into the deck building process and some of the individual cards that I've selected for this particular build of Strange Supreme Wiccan Thanos. But first, let's just talk about Strange Supreme and Wiccan Thanos as a whole. Also, shout out to Vi on my Discord, who sort of provided an inspiration for this video. They said they enjoyed hearing my thought process in my recent tournament games and throughout my typical gameplay videos, and wanted to hear some of that thought process applied to just deck overviews that isn't just the surface level, here's the 12 cards, here's what they do. So that's what we're gonna try in this video. And if there's any content that you want to see on this YouTube channel, feel free to let me know in the comments or on my Discord, and I'll be happy to oblige, and I'm open to different ideas for content, so we'll see how this one goes. Now, Thanos, Wiccan, Strange Supreme, like I said, big shocker, this is not a crazy deck, right? This will probably be the most played deck at the Golden Gauntlet, and to an extent, I kind of wanted to avoid the most played deck, because I think that once people know what the most played deck is, they will potentially try to tech their cards to tackle that deck specifically in some ways, and that is something that you do want to kind of keep in mind when you go into a tournament like this. People are potentially going to be prepared to try to beat you. And how do people beat Strange Supreme Wiccan Thanos? Well, I think that more or less the best way to attack this deck, unfortunately, is to also play Thanos. And that sounds like a non-answer. That was what I responded to a comment today with. Someone said, hey, Infinity Conquest is coming up soon. I want to beat Thanos. I want to get an Infinity border split. What can I play to beat all the Thanos? And my answer was Thanos. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to play this deck, and specifically, I think the ongoing version of Thanos has a really good matchup into this, and also the Surtur Scar version of Thanos has a reasonable matchup into this, and that is going to inform some of my deck building decisions here, specifically the idea to include both Shang-Chi and Enchantress as a means to have outs to both of the high roll potential out of those decks. And those decks are prepared for Shang-Chi and Enchantress as well. They have to be. They are playing Cosmo for Enchantress. They are playing Armor for Shang-Chi. It's not like these cards just win the matchup, but that is sort of my concession to those matches. Now, those matches are pretty similar to this deck, and that gets to the other part of this deck. This deck is Jund, which, if you've played Magic the Gathering, I think is a pretty fair comparison. If you haven't played Magic the Gathering, I'll break down what Jund basically is. It is the format's most efficient removal spells and threats, and we don't have removal spells necessarily in the same way in Marvel Snap, though we kind of do with the aforementioned Shang-Chi and Enchantress. but this is also just very efficient threats and not really in a way that you can hate on it. There aren't cards that are just going to hose this deck specifically. You kind of have to be doing your own proactive game plan, and that's the best way to potentially have a shot at beating this deck. And then even if you do, this deck does have those efficient answers that I brought up in the form of Shang-Chi, Enchantress, and then also Mobius, Eliath, and Cosmo as ways to answer anybody that's trying to go over the top of you. The way that you beat Jund is by playing Jund, but just like slightly Jundier. And by that I mean, in the case of Magic the Gathering's Jund, if your opponent is playing a bunch of good 3-cost cards that are the best 3-cost cards that you can play, the way that you beat them is by playing the best 4-cost cards that you can play. Just going a little bit above them to try to grab an advantage of having slightly better cards, but Marvel Snap doesn't really have that as an option since all games are just going to be 6 turns, which means when a deck that plays like a Jund-style deck becomes the best, it's really tough to attack, and the way that you do is still in a similar fashion with the Surtur Thanos deck and the ongoing Thanos deck, is to just be like a consistent deck that just consistently has slightly more power. If this deck is trying to put out, let's say 20 power in 2 locations, the way to beat this deck is to just go for 21 power. Don't go for 22, don't go for 25, because then this deck's going to be able to knock you down a peg. But if you just go slightly above that, then you might be able to find your footing. I did consider the other versions of Thanos for this event myself, namely the ongoing Thanos. I played that in a tournament last week and wound up losing to the eventual winner of the event, which was also an ongoing Thanos deck that put Super Skrull in it to even beat that mirror. And that's a great example of just going like a little bit higher, just playing 1 card, but otherwise, if you're looking at 2 ongoing decks, how do you beat ongoing? Well, just play ongoing and then just tweak it a little bit. Throw in a Rogue or throw in a Super Skrull so that you can beat the mirror, and then you've still got a pretty well-rounded deck. And that was definitely something that I was looking at and considering a lot going into the Golden Gauntlet. I did feel like the ongoing and Surtur versions of the deck potentially were a little bit more able to be hated out. If people are going to be playing Killmonger, and so Killmonger is the main way that you hate on the ongoing version of the deck, but the other way that you hate on both of those 2 versions of the deck is you actually just go way over the top of those. If that deck's a 21, you don't go for 22, you go for 28. You go for 30s and 40s with Mr. Negative or Iron Man in your Agent Venom Bast decks with Cassandra Nova or Darkhawk, things like that. Leave those decks, Surtur, Thanos, and ongoing Thanos, at a little bit worse position because they're not dedicating as much or any of their deck to hate pieces as much as this deck can, and this deck really gets to dodge a lot of that same hate. It doesn't really... I've played against a bunch of Killmonger with this deck, and especially if you know the Killmonger's coming, and you have an ability to eat up those stones with Strange Supreme as soon as possible, it ain't no thing some of the time. So this can really catch those people that are trying to catch the people playing those ongoing, and let's call those like... I don't want to call those like Supreme Thanoses. Let's just call those non-Supreme Thanoses. Even though the Surtur deck will often run Strange Supreme, I'm just going to use that as a blanket term going forward. If you're expecting a lot of those non-Supreme Thanos lists, then you'll play a bunch of tech to beat that, and then this kind of gets to come in and clean up all of those people. And if we look at the metagame as a whole, I do think that this will be the most played deck in the tournament. But I think there's also just going to be a lot of random people in the tournament playing whatever, because this is an open event, which means that there is a pretty wide open field. I do think that the level of players in this event is going to be higher than in Infinity Conquest, though, for instance, and the fact that you have to go like 8-1 in order to make day 2 of the event certainly makes it harder than in Infinity Conquest. I would say it's probably about as hard as winning like 4 Infinity Conquests in a row. If I had to gauge it, that still might be selling it a little bit short though. And at the end of the day, only one person is going to win this golden gauntlet, whereas a bunch of people can win a bunch of Infinity Conquests in a given season. I did have one consideration that, so if we take a look at the Super Scroll ongoing Thanos list that won the crown last weekend, that is, I think, a perfect example of how to attack a metagame in the best possible way, because you have this deck that is representing most of the field, then you play this deck that's a little bit better than it, and then you play the deck that beats that. But if we take that same example, then what could potentially be considered the best deck is the ongoing Thanos. And if people want to play the deck that beats that, they're going to play like just Killmonger, Silver Surfer shenanigans, and then this can come in and potentially beat those decks again. And I wouldn't say that we exactly have like a rock, paper, scissors metagame, but for the most part, I think that a lot of competitive games like this do come down to effectively rock, paper, scissors metagames, where there's a best deck, there's a deck that beats the best deck, and then there's the deck that beats the deck that beats the best deck, which is usually beatable by the best deck. And where do you want to be in a given format is kind of based off the total metagame percentage, because you'd love to get yourself, so if the whole, let's just say it's rock, paper, scissors. If this is rock. Right now we're looking at rock on the screen. So let's say that rock is the most common deck. You would expect to see a metagame where paper is then able to rise to the top. So you might expect paper to then win the tournament. However, where things get a little bit tricky is that if you can weave in a scissors and get into the top 8, and you are in a top 8 filled with paper, well then deuces to the paper, and hopefully that makes some sense. And in a large event, this is going to be a 400 or 500 person event, being able to bring scissors and just hope to get lucky and dodge all those rocks and then slice up the paper at the end of the day can certainly be a winning strategy. Hopefully y'all are still following this metaphor. It's a little bit simplified and doesn't always work out that way. For sure, sometimes just rock comes around and wins it because too many people pick scissors and just get crushed. And I am still expecting a lot of scissors. I would expect paper to be the smallest portion of this metagame. That would be the non-Supreme Thanos versions. And because of that, I am just trying to play the deck that I think will give me the most positive matchups, just trying to play the numbers. But I think if you really wanted to gamble for that number 1 slot, playing something that is bad on the numbers, just hoping to get lucky, is also a great strategy. Yeah, this is definitely like a next level concept, and I think doesn't apply to most people, because most people are just looking for, hey, what can I play to hit infinite even, or what can I play in the Infinity Conquest? And to some extent these things don't matter in that, but to some extent they also do. So that's what informed my overall deck choice, but I did still want to talk about some of these individual card decisions that I threw on here, especially some of them that I don't see everyone playing, but first I want to talk about all of the tech options in this deck, both Shang-Chi and Enchantress, which I personally have not really been playing, but I think is really good for this format specifically. So open deck lists do reward and punish certain things differently. People talk about in open deck list tournaments, Heimdall is not necessarily the best card because it is very straightforward what your cards are looking to do on that final turn. They're all trying to move to the left, one location, and that can be very easy to play around. Now, where Heimdall can still come in nicely is if you have a different card. Like imagine there was a right Heimdall. Well, if you were just playing, like it's the exact same card as Heimdall and it just moves all your cards one location to the right. If you were playing on ladder, the existence of right Heimdall would actually just make left Heimdall better because your opponent wouldn't know which one you decided to play in your deck, and you would make plays that could potentially telegraph which one that you had, but you could also like switch it out in between games if you play against the same opponents. If you're like very high up on the post-infinite leaderboard, you could sometimes bring right Heimdall and people are going to think you're playing left Heimdall, etc. However, in an open deck list format, your opponents would always know which Heimdall list you were playing and be able to play around it accordingly, unless you were playing both. And I think that's one of the powerful things that the ongoing version of Thanos can do, similar to decks that we've seen in the past that play Doctor Doom and Eliath, for instance, out of an Arishem deck, being able to either attack one location with a bunch of power and disruption, or spread your power out into all three locations, and being able to represent both of those lines on the final turn of the game or penultimate turn of the game can leave your opponent unsure of what they have to do. In a similar fashion, bringing all of these tech cards means that your opponent might be just afraid and unwilling to play around any of them. And what I'm hoping to do with this Shang-Chi and Enchantress is to see the word retreat on my screen as often as possible, because if my opponent is not able to beat a Shang-Chi, sometimes they're going to get scared and they're going to run away. And if they're not able to beat an Enchantress, same thing. Some of them are just going to get scared and run away. And that's really why they're in the deck. They are there because this is an open deck list format, and I want people to see my deck and be like, oh gosh, I gotta play around all of this. I don't want them to necessarily think about, okay, this guy's Wiccan's curve is a little bit off, maybe. I don't want them to think about, that this might be lacking a little bit of power, that I might not have the necessary power to win multiple locations. Want them to get scared of the cards that I have and be unwilling to press that end turn button on turn 6. And I'm going to try to leverage that as much as possible. I will have my full gameplay rounds edited up probably Monday, probably not on Sunday, but probably by Monday, just so that way I'm not like counter streaming the event. And yeah, hopefully they are able to win me some cubes. We'll see how all of that works. Mobius, Cosmo, Eliath, similar things, but not necessarily the same. I think that Cosmo, Mobius, and Eliath really are there to stop people from going over the top of you, to stop people from hitting those like 40 points of power. If they're trying to do anything absolutely ridiculous, then Mobius, Eliath, and Cosmo can hopefully take them down a peg. And the final cards in this deck that I want to discuss, because, okay, Sam, Strange, Mockingbird, Thanos, Wiccan, those, I think, are probably the core of this deck, if anything is. And honestly, most of this other stuff is the core too, but these 5 cards can all be cut in some capacity. I've seen also some people opt for power instead of these things. I've seen people opt for Cassandra Nova. I've seen people play speed. What else? We could still see like a Super Scroll or a Rogue. And I've played Juggernaut in this deck in the past. I do think that Juggernaut is specifically worse in that Juggernaut's like a Heimdall. Juggernaut would follow into that example, where I think Juggernaut is great on the ladder if you can catch somebody with their pants down and just steal the cubes from them, because it's not a card that they can even like process, might be able to come out of your deck. Though, I mean, people are aware of it. I just find that it catches people off guard. It can also be a good face-up card too, but I feel like it's a better face-down card, and that would be like in ladder. But I am actually playing some face-down cards in this deck, and that is why I have chosen Iron Patriot as my 2-drop of choice. There's a few different 2-drops that you could play. I have seen Surge probably most commonly recently. I have also seen Shadow King and Grandmaster. Those don't quite feel the same, though I've been told Grandmaster often plays on curve, especially if you can like Grandmaster your Time Stone. That's something that you're looking to do. But what I'm looking to do with both Iron Patriot and Copycat is give this fairly level, fairly predictable deck. I'm trying to 21 or 22 it. I'm trying to just go one more level above my opponents, but also provide some unpredictability so that they are also afraid to snap and afraid to accept my snaps, and again, be more willing to retreat. And that's really the whole goal here. At some point, I will have to win a game of Marvel Snap, and I think I will be able to do that. I think I'll be able to win games of Marvel Snap, hopefully. We'll see, we'll find out tomorrow. But I'm also hoping that I can play as little Marvel Snap as possible, and hopefully that makes sense. I think that that's always a really cheeky part of competitive games, is really you never want your opponent to play the game. And that might sound a little backwards. It might sound a little like BM, a little bit like not cool. Why would you play a game like that if your goal isn't to play? But my goal isn't to like let my opponent do all the cool stuff that they want to do, and then I just say, all right, you did more cool stuff than me, like you win this time. My goal is to shut down my opponents as often as possible and let them play as little as possible, and kind of just get in there, shake up their confidence a little bit. I do think that Marvel Snap is very much a mind game, and I think that this version of the deck in particular really plays into that. Iron Patriot being able to just deliver random cards to you. I believe, so did I feature this in my video earlier today? I believe I did, where I got a Doom 2099 from an Iron Patriot, and then I snapped. That is not the card that I wanted from Iron Patriot. This deck can't really make use of a Doom 2099 in its best draws, because you're trying to play Mockingbird, you're trying to play multiple stones, you're trying to Wiccan and use that extra energy to play multiple cards on the final turns of the game. So Doom 2099 is definitely not a high roll. And then I think I got the discount on Doom 2099, and then I was like, okay, well, I can use this discount and play Doom alongside something else and then not get the free Doom bot, or I could just play Doom by itself and then therefore not even take advantage of this discount that I'm getting. The answer was that I just snapped, and my opponent, seeing that I got an Iron Patriot discount on an unknown card, retreated. That's as simple as Marvel Snap needs to be. You don't need to play the cards all the time if your opponent is afraid of what those cards might do. Copycat is doing a similar thing here, in that you will know, and this is the other part of Iron Patriot here too, you will know most of the cards in most of the decks your opponents are playing in this Golden Gauntlet. But if Copycat is one of those cards, there is no guarantee that Copycat, I might be able to Shang-Chi 2 locations on the final turn. Sure, if Copycat was Grandmaster, I might also have that possibility, but this allows me to represent that while also not having it, or just having something else totally different. So I think that is that's just where I wanted to be, and I think that this kind of helps to showcase my philosophy going into this event. I wanted to play face-up cards that would scare my opponent, and I also wanted to play some face-down cards that would make my opponent a little bit unsure, and also, yeah, really just scare them. There's no other way to put it. We are going full mental tactics here, and that might sound a little bit mental, but hopefully that helps you clue into what my mental was for the Golden Gauntlet. Don't think I really need to talk about any of the other cards in this deck. it is really just about playing the most, like, Strange Supreme actually does some things, and Sam Wilson actually does some things, but Thanos sometimes does some things, but for the most part, like, these are just cards that are just existing. These are the Tarmogoyfs in those Jund examples. Maybe these are like Bloodbraid Elves. This almost feels like maybe like a Grim Lavamancer or something that's like a little bit tricky. Strange Supreme can draw you some extra board space, so there's some cheeky stuff going on there with all of that, but really these are just meant to be efficient threats. Thanos is efficient in a different way. Thanos is actually kind of like a Bloodbraid Elf in that it's an inefficient threat, usually. If you can play it as a 5/12, sure, or a 5/22, sure, those are very efficient threats, but mostly the efficient part of Thanos is that it starts in your opening hand. So it's giving you a slightly smaller deck, which sounds unintuitive because of course he adds those stones to your deck, but it gives you that consistent play. It means that you don't have to play a bunch of different top-end things because you can always rely on Thanos for the most part, and just that extra card in your hand gives you more different possibilities to play around whatever your opponent is doing that game. Mockingbird as a, like, 2/9 or even a 3/9 is obviously just really efficient, and same thing for Strange Supreme as a 2/14 or whatever it may be. Sam is the weakest of these because you need to draw it early on in order to get the most value out of it, but it also just has a lot of value in how it can interact with that shield to potentially access inaccessible locations or fill up locations that care about getting filled up, or win locations like Rickety Bridge or something like that. So the other cards are all just straightforward pound for pound good cards. Maybe Sam Wilson's like a Thragtusk, Thanos is a Bloodbraid Elf, Mockingbird is also probably a Bloodbraid Elf, and Strange Supreme can be our Tarmogoyf. And then we've got the removal suite. We've got a little bit of interesting over-the-top, like Copycat. I would say that's like our Hunt Master of the Fells. I'm talking to such a specific audience with these references that I've probably lost the thread here a little bit, and there's probably better ways for me to break down some of those cards, but I think I've done that a little bit through this video. Hopefully all of that makes sense, and I guess to round out, I will just talk on Cosmo, Mobius, and Goliath just real quick, just to say that those are aimed at, so Cosmo is serving double duty. It's protecting your cards from Shang-Chi, and then it is also protecting or limiting your opponent's ability to go over the top with some wacky combos or things like, you know, Wong, Galactus, Silver Surfer, Hela, different things like that. Goliath, very similar story there. And then Mobius gets to come in and also do some nice work in a lot of these mid-rangey mirrors, stopping things like Surge, Mockingbird, Thanos, and then also Scar out of the Scar Surtur version of Thanos. So with that, I think we've mostly broken down everything. Didn't talk about Wiccan. Wiccan is just the reason the rest of the deck is in the configuration that it is. It's a payoff for the Thanos stones and a reason that you want to play enough 2 and 3 cost cards, and then gives you something to play efficiently on the final turns. Some of the best things that you can do is a turn 5. Turn 5's a little bit tricky with that 7 energy, but the best thing sometimes is like Thanos plus Strange Supreme or a Sam Wilson even still at that stage of the game. And then on the final turn, you've got a lot of crazy options like Shang-Chi plus Enchantress or Shang-Chi plus Cosmo. That was something you could have done on the previous turn still, or Goliath plus a pair of stones just for a little bit more power. I think we're good here. I think I've done a reasonable job breaking down the deck in hopefully a way that doesn't just feel surface level. and feels like I'm providing some value to the content here. Let me know what you think about this content and about this deck, and wish me luck tomorrow in the Golden Gauntlet. But for today, that's going to be it for me. Thank you guys very much for watching. I'm NoLucksGiven. Peace.